We were sitting in the basement of Ben's house. Me, Ben, and Jordan. Half buried in old beanbags, surrounded by the glow of his retro gaming setup. It smelled faintly of Cheetos, teenage desperation, and the kind of nostalgia that only manifests in the man caves of 20-somethings who refuse to grow up. The night started innocently enough. Some rounds of GoldenEye, a few beers, the usual back and forth about who had the fastest reflexes and worst aim. Then Ben's sister, Danny, wandered downstairs in search of the extra HDMI cable, her oversized sweater trailing behind her like a cape. She was older than us by a couple of years and always had this quiet, untouchable vibe, like she knew something we didn't. "You guys still playing that?" she teased, nodding at the game on the screen. "Didn't that come out before any of you were born?" Ben rolled his eyes. "Shouldn't you be upstairs contemplating the mysteries of the universe or whatever it is you do?" Danny snorted. "I'm working, actually." She spotted the HDMI cable on a shelf, grabbed it, and turned to leave, but then she hesitated. "And for the record, it's not the universe. It's just personal stuff." Something about the way she said it caught my attention. Not that I was obsessed with Danny or anything, but she rarely mentioned her personal life around us. She was more of a float-in, drop a sarcastic comment, float-out kind of presence. "What kind of personal stuff?" I asked, more out of boredom than genuine curiosity. She gave me a look, the kind that could wither plants. "It's private." "Ooh, mysterious," Jordan said, leaning back and grinning. "Come on, Danny, spill. What's the big secret? Are you working on, like, a tell-all memoir about your time babysitting Ben?" Danny's lips twitched like she was fighting a smile, but she just shook her head and left without another word. The moment the door closed behind her, Ben sighed. "She's probably doing some weird journaling thing. You know, she got really into writing about her dreams last year." Jordan smirked. "Dreams? Like, Freud style?" "I dreamed about a train, and now I think I want to marry it." I laughed. "Maybe it's weirder than that. Maybe she's writing poetry about aliens or something." Ben rolled his eyes again, but I could tell he was thinking about it. And before I realized it, I was too. The next day, during a lull at work, I mentioned the whole thing to my group chat. Not just Ben and Jordan, but a few others from our friend circle. "Danny's been working on some mysterious personal project," I wrote, punctuated with a winky face. "Apparently it's so secret she won't even tell us." That's when Ellie, who had been Danny's best friend in high school, chimed in. "Oh, I bet it's the blog." "Blog?" I replied, immediately intrigued. Ellie sent a shrug emoji. "Yeah, she used to write this anonymous blog in college. Lots of, like, really personal stuff. I didn't think she still did it, though." Now I was hooked. An anonymous blog? Personal stuff? My brain spun with possibilities. Maybe it was poetry. Maybe it was confessions about her past. Maybe it was, God forbid, a collection of rants about us, the idiots in her brother's friend group. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, over another gaming session, I casually dropped it into conversation. "Hey, Ben, did you know your sister has a blog?" Ben nearly choked on his soda. "What?" "Ellie mentioned it today," I said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. "Apparently, Danny's been writing all this personal stuff online for years." "She never told you?" Ben frowned. "No, and I don't think she'd want you snooping around about it either." But that was the thing. I wasn't really snooping, was I? The idea of the blog was just intriguing. It felt like an unsolved mystery that needed cracking, and I couldn't resist the pull. The next day, during my lunch break, I decided to do a little digging. I started with vague Google searches, combinations of words that felt vaguely Danny-like, anonymous musings, philosophy blog, sibling anecdotes. After an hour of frustration, I was ready to give up when I stumbled across a tiny site with a name that practically screamed, "This is it." It was called Unspoken Chapters. I clicked on it, and there it was, an archive of blog posts stretching back years. The writing was unmistakably hers, sharp, introspective, often funny in a dry, self-deprecating way. But the topics were what really got me. There were essays about her struggles with imposter syndrome, stories about old friendships that had soured, and even a few pieces about how much she envied the camaraderie her brother shared with his friends. There were moments so raw, so brutally honest, that I felt like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to be in. But instead of closing the tab, I kept reading. Later that night, I told Ben and Jordan about it. I even pulled up the site on my phone to show them. At first, they were as shocked as I was, but then they started laughing at some of the funnier anecdotes, especially the ones that involved Ben. She wrote about the time you got stuck in the treehouse and cried for an hour. Jordan howled, clutching his stomach. Dude, this is gold. Yeah, but she makes it sound like I'm some helpless idiot, Ben grumbled, but he was smiling too. It didn't feel wrong at the time. It felt like we were just connecting with a different side of her, one she never shared with us directly. But then Maya showed up late to our next hangout, saying, "Oh my God, Danny's blog is incredible. I can't believe you found it." Apparently, Jordan had mentioned it to her, and she, in turn, had sent the link to Ellie. By the end of the week, most of our friend group had read it, and everyone had an opinion. It didn't take long for Danny to find out. She cornered me in the parking lot of Ben's house that Friday night, her eyes blazing. "You told them about my blog?" I stammered, caught off guard. Well, yeah, but it's not like I meant to out you or anything. They just found it interesting." "Interesting?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "You think my personal thoughts and struggles are some kind of entertainment for your friends?" "It's not like that," I said quickly. "We just—" "No, you don't get it," she cut me off. "That blog was anonymous for a reason. It was the one place I could be honest, where I didn't have to filter myself. And now, thanks to you, I feel like I've been stripped naked in front of an audience I never wanted." Her words hit me like a slap, but I tried to defend myself. "I thought you'd be proud, honestly. People love your writing." She laughed, bitter and low. "Of course you'd think that, because you never stop to think about how your actions affect other people." She stormed off before I could say anything else, leaving me standing there with my head spinning. I didn't mean to hurt her. I genuinely thought I was sharing something amazing about her talent. But now I can't help but wonder if I've crossed a line I can't uncross. AITA? My 29th birthday was supposed to be simple but unforgettable. Not because of some wild extravagance or choreographed spectacle. Quite the opposite. I wanted to host something small but deeply personal. Something where people wouldn't just celebrate me but get a glimpse of the kind of person I was growing into. So I planned the time capsule dinner. The idea was elegant in its simplicity. Everyone would bring something small, a photo, a trinket, even a note, that represented their life right now. We'd seal it all in a little wooden box I'd bought from an antique shop, which I'd open again on my 39th birthday. It was my way of saying, this is who we were, together, at this exact moment in time. I picked a warm, candlelit bistro that had just enough quirk to feel intimate without being pretentious. The guest list was tight. 12 people, my closest friends, and my younger sister, Erin. Erin was more than a sister. She was my cheerleader, my confidant, the one who could make me laugh even when I wanted to cry. I had no doubt she'd bring something meaningful for the capsule. She always got it. The night began perfectly. The table was buzzing with energy as everyone ordered wine and raved about the food. I'd brought little index cards for people to jot down explanations for their items. My best friend Greg brought a tiny action figure of Spider-Man, representing a new confidence he'd found since starting therapy. Clara, my coworker, contributed a pressed flower from the first bouquet her girlfriend had given her. When it was Erin's turn, she grinned mischievously. "I went a little off script," she said, pulling out a neatly wrapped envelope. "Off script?" I asked, raising an eyebrow but smiling. She slid it across the table to me. "You'll understand when you open it. Trust me." The table erupted into teasing and guesses. Is it a love letter? Is it blackmail? Erin played coy, refusing to spill the secret. I laughed along, certain it was something funny but heartfelt. After all, this was Erin. The moment came to seal the capsule. Everyone watched as I placed each item inside, narrating like a museum curator. Greg's Spider-Man, Clara's flower, Sophie's keychain, and on and on. Finally, I picked up Erin's envelope. "This," I said dramatically, "is apparently a mystery." People laughed, clinking glasses. I kissed the envelope theatrically before placing it in the box, shutting the lid with a flourish. And that's when Erin stood up. "Before we move on," she said, a little too loudly, "I actually have something to share." I blinked, a knot of unease forming in my stomach. "Erin?" She held up her glass and smiled, the kind of smile that warned me something was coming. "I wasn't planning to announce this tonight, but I'm pregnant." The table exploded with cheers. People clapped, screamed, hugged her. Greg knocked over a glass of wine in his excitement. Even the waiter chimed in with a "congratulations." And me? I just sat there, frozen, a smile plastered to my face. Erin's voice cut through the chaos. "It's still early, but everything looks good so far. I found out last month, and I couldn't wait to tell you all." Clara was already planning a baby shower. Greg was asking if he could be the fun uncle. Erin basked in the glow of their attention, her cheeks pink with excitement. My hands clenched in my lap. This was my night. My carefully crafted, intimate night. I didn't mind sharing the spotlight, but this wasn't sharing. It was a full-on eclipse. "Wow," I said finally, my voice tight. "That's big news, Erin." She turned to me, beaming. "I know. Isn't it wild?" "Wild, yeah," I said. "Also, a little ironic, don't you think? Announcing something so permanent during a time capsule dinner kind of upstages the whole moment in time theme, doesn't it?" The table went quiet. Erin's smile faltered. "I didn't mean to upstage anything," she said, her tone defensive. "Didn't you?" I said, trying to keep my voice light but failing. "You couldn't have waited until, I don't know, literally any other day?" Greg cleared his throat awkwardly. Clara suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. Erin's eyes narrowed. "I thought you'd be happy for me." "I am happy for you," I snapped. "I just don't understand why you had to hijack my night to share your big news." "Oh, come on," she said, crossing her arms. "It's not like I planned this to ruin your dinner. I just wanted to share something important with people I care about. Is that a crime?" "It's not a crime," I said, my voice rising. "It's just inconsiderate. You know how much this night meant to me. I spent weeks planning it. And now it's not about the time capsule, or my birthday, or anything else. It's about you." Erin's face hardened. "I didn't realize your birthday came with a monopoly on joy." "Don't twist this around," I said, feeling my face flush. "This isn't about me being selfish. It's about you being incapable of letting anyone else have the spotlight for 5 minutes." The tension was unbearable. Someone muttered, "Maybe we should get dessert." But no one moved. "Fine," Erin said. Standing abruptly, she grabbed her coat and slung it over her shoulder. "Congratulations, big sister. You just managed to make my happy news about your feelings. Again." With that, she stormed out. The rest of the dinner was a train wreck. People stayed out of politeness, but the conversation was stilted, and no one dared mention the capsule again. When I got home, I opened a bottle of wine and sat staring at the empty box on my coffee table. Was I wrong? Should I have just smiled and let Erin have her moment, even if it cost me mine? Or was it fair to call her out for stealing the spotlight? "AITA?" The silence in the room was so thick it felt alive, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. The old man across from me shuffled a deck of cards, his fingers moving with a precision that seemed impossible for his age. The cards made a sharp, snapping sound with each shuffle, breaking the stillness like small explosions. "This is a simple game," he said finally, his voice as thin and worn as the threadbare carpet beneath our feet. "Pick a card. If it's red, you stay. If it's black, you leave. But if you pick the Joker, well, that's a whole other matter." I didn't want to play. I didn't even know how I'd ended up here, in this decrepit room lit by a single, buzzing fluorescent bulb. The last thing I remembered was stepping out of my car to check on what I thought was a flat tire. There had been a noise, a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to come from the trees lining the highway, and then nothing, just the sensation of falling. Now, here I was, sitting at a table with a man who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in decades. His eyes were sharp and bright, though, scanning me like he could see every secret I'd ever tried to hide. "What happens if I don't play?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The old man smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made your stomach twist. Then the game plays you. I didn't understand what that meant, but something about the way he said it made my fingers twitch. I reached for the deck, my hand trembling slightly as I drew a card. A black 6 of clubs. Well, that's unfortunate, the old man said, his smile widening. But the rules are the rules. Before I could react, the card in my hand began to burn. Not with fire, but with a cold, searing sensation that shot up my arm. I dropped it, clutching my wrist, but the feeling didn't stop. It spread through my chest, up my neck, into my head, until I felt like my entire body was being hollowed out. When the sensation finally stopped, I opened my eyes to find the room had changed. The walls were no longer cracked and yellowed, but made of glass, stretching up into a sky filled with swirling, iridescent colors. The old man was gone, replaced by a figure dressed in a suit that shimmered like oil on water. "Welcome," the figure said, its voice echoing in my head rather than my ears. "You've been chosen." "Chosen for what?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it gestured to the table, where a new deck of cards had appeared. These cards were unlike any I'd ever seen, their edges glowing faintly, their faces depicting images that seemed to shift and move when I looked at them. "You'll play again," the figure said, "and again, until you understand." "Understand what?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. But the figure was already gone, leaving me alone in the glass room with the glowing cards. I didn't want to play. Every instinct in my body told me to walk away, to run, to do anything but touch those cards. But the memory of the old man's words haunted me. "Then the game plays you." I reached for the deck, my hands shaking. This time, the card I drew wasn't a number or a suit. It was a picture of myself, standing in the very room I was in, holding the very card I was looking at. And beneath the image, in bold, black letters, were the words, "This is only the beginning." The glass walls around me began to crack, spiderwebbing outward with a sound like shattering ice. The colors in the sky grew brighter, swirling faster, until they were a blinding vortex of light. I closed my eyes, bracing for impact, but instead of breaking, the glass seemed to melt away, leaving me standing on solid ground. I was no longer in the room. I was in a forest, the trees impossibly tall, their branches stretching into a sky that was neither day nor night, but some in-between twilight. The cards were still in my hand, though they no longer glowed. Ahead of me, a path wound through the trees, lined with lanterns that flickered with an otherworldly light. The rules had changed, but the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I could still hear the old man's laughter, echoing through the trees like a ghost. I hadn't thought about Rachel in years. Not since college, where we both majored in photography and she was the storm to my breeze. Always late to class, loud in critiques, and somehow captivating in a way that felt dangerous. So when her name lit up my phone screen one chilly Tuesday night, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won out. "Ellie," she said, dragging out the last syllable like we were back at that grimy coffee shop we used to haunt. "I need a favor." The favor turned out to be her crashing at my place for a bit. She was between gigs, something vague involving performance art and liberating spaces, and needed a spot to regroup. She swore she'd stay out of my way, keep things tidy, and be gone in no time. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Nostalgia is a dangerous drug. Rachel arrived the next day in a taxi, her belongings stuffed into mismatched tote bags and a suitcase held together with duct tape. She brought with her a peculiar energy that immediately unsettled my tidy one-bedroom apartment. She plopped down on my couch, kicked off her boots, and declared, "This place has potential." At first, it was interesting. Rachel was a whirlwind of strange habits and stories that made my otherwise quiet life feel cinematic. She'd stay up until 3 a.m. building tiny dioramas out of cereal boxes, saying they were microcosms of societal decay. She cooked elaborate meals with ingredients she scrounged from farmers' markets, things like edible flowers and goat cheese curds she claimed to have bartered for. Once, She made me a tea from dandelions she picked near the park and told me it would open my chakras. It tasted like lawn clippings. She had rules for herself, bizarre ones. She wouldn't wear shoes inside but insisted on placing a single crystal under my doormat for energy cleansing. She refused to drink coffee from mugs and instead poured it into small bowls, saying it was more grounding. She talked to my plants in French, even though she didn't speak the language. I let it slide. Rachel had always been eccentric, and a part of me enjoyed her peculiar company. She even helped me get back into photography, dragging me to weird street art exhibits and once, a candlelit seance that she claimed would reveal the essence of shadow. It mostly revealed that people will pay $25 to sit in a room with bad acoustics and chant. But by the second week, her quirks began to wear thin. Rachel didn't believe in doing dishes because water waste is capitalism's leash. My sink became a graveyard of crusty plates and cups streaked with her beloved beet juice. She also didn't believe in locking doors, which I discovered one morning when I found a stray cat lounging on my kitchen counter. "He's a wanderer," she explained, as though that justified it. The straw that broke the camel's back came on a Friday night. I'd had a long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet evening. But when I came home, my apartment had been transformed. Rachel had taken every piece of furniture I owned and rearranged it into what she called a sacred spiral. My couch was now diagonal, my coffee table was upside down, and my bed had been moved into the living room, closer to the moonlight. "What is this?" I asked, standing in the doorway, stunned. She looked up from the floor, where she was tying strings of dried herbs into something that resembled a bird's nest. "I'm realigning the energy flow. This place was suffocating." "Suffocating?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Rachel, this is my home. You can't just—" She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Ellie, you've been living in a box. I'm setting you free." I stared at her, the chaos of my once orderly apartment closing in around me. "Rachel, this has to stop. I let you stay here because you said you needed help, but this is too much." Her face hardened, the warmth evaporating in an instant. "Wow," she said, standing up and brushing dried lavender off her pants. "I didn't realize you'd become so conventional. You used to be interesting." "Interesting?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't about being interesting. It's about basic respect." She shook her head, picking up one of her tote bags. "You sound like everyone else now, chained to routine, afraid of disruption." "Rachel, I'm not afraid of disruption. I'm afraid of finding another cat on my kitchen counter, or coming home to find you've painted my walls in the name of sacred geometry." She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Fine. If my presence is such a burden, I'll leave." She grabbed another bag and stormed toward the door, stopping only to pluck the crystal from under the doormat. "I hope you find whatever it is you think you're protecting." She left that night, along with her dioramas, her crystals, and the lingering smell of sage and patchouli. My apartment felt strangely empty without her, but also peaceful. I spent hours putting my furniture back in place and scrubbing dried beet juice from my sink. Now, though, I can't shake the doubt. Did I overreact? Was I too rigid? Or was Rachel just taking advantage of me, masking her chaos as creativity? So, AITA? When I found the watch, it wasn't ticking. It lay half-buried in the dirt of my garden, its tarnished gold face gleaming faintly in the afternoon sun. I was pulling weeds, grumbling about how my fiancée, Callie, always managed to disappear when chores needed doing, when my fingers brushed against the smooth metal. At first, I thought it was some junk left behind by the previous owners, but when I turned it over, the back was engraved, "For decisions made right." I almost tossed it into the trash pile, but something stopped me. Call it curiosity, call it boredom, call it something stranger. I wiped the dirt away with my sleeve and turned the tiny knob on the side. The second I did, the watch whirred to life, and the hands began spinning backward. When I looked up, the garden was gone. Instead, I was standing in the middle of our living room on a rainy Tuesday night. Weeks earlier, Callie was sitting cross-legged on the couch, a cup of tea balanced precariously on the armrest as she flipped through paint swatches. I still think sage green would make the kitchen feel more inviting, she said, holding up a card for my approval. I stared at her, dumbfounded. Ben? She asked, raising an eyebrow. You okay? I stumbled backward, the watch still clutched in my hand. What just happened? Callie frowned. What do you mean? You zoned out for a second. Are you feeling all right? I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked down at the watch. The hands had stopped spinning and were now ticking normally, as if nothing unusual had happened. Tentatively, I turned the knob again. The room blurred, and when it cleared, I was back in the garden, crouched in the dirt, weeds in hand. My breath came fast and shallow. I didn't tell Callie about the watch right away. How could I? It sounded insane, even to me. But over the next few days, I tested it. Small turns of the knob sent me back minutes or hours, while larger turns rewound days. Each time, I returned to the moment I had left, the watch ticking as though nothing had happened. It wasn't long before I realized the potential. Callie and I were in the middle of planning our wedding, which had turned into a minefield of arguments. She wanted a big celebration, the kind with string lights and signature cocktails, and a band that cost more than our rent. I wanted something simple, an elopement in the mountains, maybe, with just the two of us. Every conversation ended in frustration, and I'd started dreading the topic altogether. The next time we argued, I turned the watch. As Callie crossed her arms and accused me of not caring about her dreams, I twisted the knob and rewound 5 minutes. When the argument began again, I chose different words, softer ones. I do care, I said. I just don't want us to go into debt for one day. This time, she sighed instead of snapping. I get that, she said, but it's not just one day. It's a memory we'll carry forever. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. I realized then that the watch wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon. With every rewind, I learned more about what to say, how to act, how to steer Callie and myself toward peace. Arguments that would have lasted hours became short and civil. Tense moments dissolved before they began. For the first time in months, our relationship felt easy. But the watch had a way of tempting me. If it could smooth over arguments, what else could it fix? I began using it more often. When I spilled coffee on my shirt before a meeting, I rewound time and avoided the stain. When I said something dumb at a party, I rewound and replaced my words with something clever. Each turn of the knob felt like a cheat code for life, a way to avoid mistakes, to always make the right decision. The problem was, I started noticing things. Little inconsistencies. The way Callie would laugh at my jokes but seemed distracted afterward, like she was trying to remember something just out of reach. The way certain objects, her favorite mug, a book she swore she'd never read, would show up in places they shouldn't be. Once, she looked at me over dinner and said, "Do you ever feel like things are repeating?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I don't know. Like déjà vu, but stronger. Like we're going in circles." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. I started wondering if the watch had limits, if there were consequences I couldn't see. I decided to stop using it. For weeks, I left it in a drawer and tried to live life without rewinding. But the pull was always there, a quiet voice whispering in the back of my mind. You could fix this. You don't have to let it go wrong. The breaking point came during a fight about the guest list. Callie wanted to invite her co-worker Rachel, who I couldn't stand. I said something cruel, I don't even remember what, and her face crumpled in a way that made my stomach drop. She stood up and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The watch was in my hand before I could think. I twisted the knob, hard, and rewound 20 minutes. When Callie brought up Rachel again, I smiled and said, "Sure, invite her. It's your day too." She beamed, and the fight was avoided, but something felt off. When she left the room to grab her laptop, I noticed the watch was still ticking backward, the hands spinning faster than ever. No matter how many times I turned the knob to stop it, it wouldn't listen. The world began to blur, and I felt myself pulled along with it. When the spinning stopped, I wasn't in the garden or the living room. I was in a memory, one I hadn't thought about in years. Callie and I were on our first date, sitting on the steps of the library, eating sandwiches we'd bought from a food truck. She was laughing at something I'd said, her head tilted back, her smile wide and unguarded. I wanted to reach out and touch her, to tell her everything that was coming, but I couldn't move. I was an observer, trapped in my own past. The scene shifted. Now it was the night I proposed, on a bridge lit by fairy lights. Callie said yes before I even finished asking, tears streaming down her face. I felt the joy of that moment all over again, but it was tinged with something darker. Regret, maybe, or fear. The scenes came faster, a kaleidoscope of memories, good and bad, big and small. Every fight, every kiss, every decision I'd rewound and reworked. I realized with a sinking feeling that the watch wasn't just showing me the past. It was showing me how I changed it. When I finally returned to the present, Callie was staring at me, her brow furrowed. "Ben," she said softly, "what's going on? You've been different. Like you're not really here." I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to throw the watch away, to promise her that from now on, I'd stop trying to control everything. But I couldn't find the words. All I could think was, if I rewound this moment, maybe I'd get it right. Maybe she'd understand. My fingers tightened around the watch. I turned the knob. AITA? When I arrived at my cousin Elena's art exhibit, the air in the gallery was thick with the scent of paint and expensive perfume. People floated between her abstract canvases, nodding their heads like they understood some hidden language. Elena stood near the entrance, basking in the glow of compliments. She had always been the artistic one in the family, the one who turned the mess of her emotions into something tangible. Everyone admired her for it, including me, I suppose. But as I wandered the gallery, sipping the mediocre wine, I couldn't help but think about my own achievements. Sure, I didn't splash paint on a canvas and call it profound, but my career in urban planning was nothing to sneeze at. It wasn't art, but it shaped lives in ways Elena's work never could. By the time I reached her third canvas, a swirling mess of purples and blacks with the title Turbulent Heart, I felt an itch to say something. "These are really something," I said when I found Elena again. "You've got a great setup here." She beamed. "Thanks, it's been such a journey. Honestly, I wasn't sure if this series would come together, but it finally clicked. The gallery owners said it might even sell out." "That's great," I said, giving her a side hug. "Though, it's funny. At work, I just wrapped up a project for the city's downtown revitalization. Took 2 years, and now businesses are thriving again. I guess I'm used to projects where the results are tangible." Elena's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Art is tangible," she said lightly. "It's just not measured in spreadsheets." "Oh, totally," I said, waving my glass. "I'm just saying it's a different kind of impact, you know?" She nodded politely and excused herself to greet someone else. I watched her go, telling myself I hadn't said anything wrong. After all, I was proud of my work, too. Why shouldn't I share that? The real tension began a month later at a family barbecue. Elena's exhibit had been a roaring success. Mom couldn't stop talking about the newspaper write-up. "They called it emotionally evocative," she said, showing me the article on her phone for the third time. "Evocative is a good word," I said. "Though, if we're being honest, a lot of art critics just throw words like that around. It's almost like they're reading from a script." Mom frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well," I said, shrugging, "I'm not saying her work isn't good. I'm just saying it's easier to impress people when you're dealing with emotions instead of logistics. Like, no one's writing a glowing review about how I streamlined public transit routes to save commuters 20 minutes a day, but that's real impact." Elena, who had been quietly flipping burgers at the grill, turned around. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you saying what I do isn't real?" "No," I said quickly. "I'm just saying it's different. Like, art is nice, but it's kind of a luxury, right? What I do helps people in practical ways. That's all I meant." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she handed the spatula to Dad and walked inside, leaving the rest of us in awkward silence. I felt a flash of guilt, but it passed quickly. I hadn't been trying to hurt her feelings. I was just stating facts. The final blow came a few weeks later at a game night with some mutual friends. We were playing some charades-like game, and the clue was successful. Elena immediately mimed painting, and someone shouted, "Elena!" Everyone laughed, and she bowed dramatically. "Don't forget," I said, unable to resist, "success can look like other things too, like reworking city infrastructure or designing affordable housing." Just saying. The room fell silent, except for the sound of someone awkwardly shuffling the cards. Elena looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You really can't help yourself, can you? What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice rising defensively. "It means," she said, setting her drink down, "that you can't talk about anyone else's achievements without dragging in your own. It's like you can't stand the idea of someone else being good at something." "That's not true," I said, laughing nervously. "I'm just pointing out that success isn't one size fits all." "No," she said sharply. "You're pointing out that you think what you do is better. Every time. You're not comparing, you're competing." I stared at her, my cheeks burning. The worst part was that everyone else in the room looked like they agreed with her. "I'm just being honest," I said weakly. "I didn't mean to make it a competition." "Maybe not," she said, "but it sure feels like one." The rest of the night was a blur. I spent the drive home replaying her words, trying to figure out if she was right. I hadn't thought of it as competing. I just wanted people to see that what I did mattered, too. Was that so wrong? Or was I, as Elena seemed to think, making everything about me? Now, as I sit here writing this, I keep going back and forth. Was I just sharing my perspective, or was I undermining her accomplishments to prop up my own? AITA? The wedding of my cousin Oliver was the kind of event you'd only expect to see in movies or on royal family Instagram accounts. It was set in this sprawling vineyard in the Italian countryside, with golden sunlight streaming through trellises of grapevines. The bride, Celeste, looked like she had been sculpted by Michelangelo himself, her gown flowing like liquid starlight. Everything was perfect, down to the hand-lettered place cards and the towering cake adorned with real roses. Of course, Oliver's side of the family, my side, was a little less refined. Don't get me wrong, we clean up well, but under the fancy dresses and tailored suits, we're all still a pack of loud, overly sarcastic misfits, which, as it turned out, was my problem that day. See, I'd been named the family humorist years ago, a title I accepted with both pride and a sprinkle of hubris. My talent? Knowing exactly when to drop a zinger that would have everyone laughing. Weddings, funerals, baby showers. If there was a crowd, I could get them rolling. I was good at it, too. But Oliver's wedding? I was itching for the perfect moment. It felt like a stage had been built just for me. When I arrived, the vibe was already stiff. Oliver's in-laws were loaded. Old money types who probably sent their caviar back if it didn't sparkle enough. They floated around the reception like ghosts of Victorian aristocrats, speaking in clipped sentences and sipping champagne as if it might poison them. My family, on the other hand, was already halfway through the cocktail menu and strategizing who could sneak more hors d'oeuvres without being noticed. The ceremony itself was breathtaking, and I'll admit I teared up a little when Oliver and Celeste exchanged their vows. But then came the reception. As soon as the music started, the open bar became a magnet. I grabbed a drink, chatted with my aunts, and waited for my moment. And when Oliver stepped up to give his thank you speech, that was it. My opportunity. Oliver had just finished talking about the journey of love he and Celeste had shared, and I saw my cousin Rachel raise her champagne flute. A toast was clearly coming. I decided to strike first. Before Rachel could open her mouth, I shouted, "And let's not forget, Celeste said yes to Oliver after the third proposal. Perseverance pays off." The room erupted. Well, part of it. My side of the family burst into laughter, clinking glasses and whooping. Even a few of Celeste's bridesmaids giggled behind their hands. But the other half of the room, the moneyed half, fell silent, dead silent. Oliver's face froze mid-smile, his eyes darting toward Celeste. Celeste wasn't laughing. She wasn't even smiling. She was staring at me with the kind of icy intensity that could chill an entire vineyard. For a moment, I thought maybe she was just surprised, caught off guard by my razor-sharp wit. But then she leaned toward Oliver and whispered something in his ear. His expression went from shocked to mortified. The energy in the room shifted. Oliver stammered a few words about being grateful for everyone's support, then quickly passed the mic back to the DJ, who tried to salvage the moment with an upbeat pop song. Celeste disappeared into the crowd, and Oliver followed, looking like someone had just canceled his Netflix subscription. I was confused. It was a joke, I thought. A little cheeky, sure, but not mean. If anything, I just pointed out Oliver's persistence, which I thought was admirable. But the looks I started getting from Celeste's family told a different story. They glared at me like I'd spilled wine on a priceless heirloom. Even my mom gave me a pointed, "What were you thinking?" frown. An hour later, after circling the dance floor with my head down, Oliver finally found me. He pulled me aside, his expression somewhere between exhausted and furious. "What the hell was that, Molly?" "What?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "It was a joke. Everyone knows you proposed 3 times before Celeste said yes. I thought it was funny." "She didn't," he snapped. "Neither did her parents. They think you were implying she didn't actually want to marry me." "That's ridiculous," I said, laughing nervously. "Come on, Oliver. It's not like I said she settled for you." "You basically did," he hissed, running a hand through his hair. "Do you have any idea how much pressure this day has been for her? For us? And you, ugh, never mind." He stormed off before I could defend myself, leaving me standing there like a kid who'd just been scolded in front of the whole class. I spent the rest of the reception trying to avoid eye contact with anyone remotely related to Celeste. Even the bartender seemed to be giving me side-eye. The worst part came when my mom cornered me on the way out. "Molly," she said, her voice low and tight, "I love you, but you've got to learn when to zip it. Not every moment is a stand-up routine." I went home that night still convinced everyone was overreacting. Sure, maybe it wasn't the perfect time, but it wasn't like I'd insulted their entire marriage. Oliver and Celeste would laugh about it later, I told myself. They'd get over it. But then the next morning, I saw a Facebook post from one of Celeste's bridesmaids. "Some people don't know how to behave at weddings." SMH. I didn't need a tag to know it was about me. Now it's been 3 days. Oliver hasn't called. My mom says I need to apologize to Celeste directly, but I'm still not convinced I did anything wrong. It was a joke. A good one, too, if you ask me. If they're so sensitive they can't take a little ribbing, is that my fault? I don't know. Was I really out of line? Or are they just being uptight? AITA? I've always been a late-night walker. There's something about the stillness of the world at midnight that makes my mind click into place. The hum of distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. It's like the city breathes slower, giving me room to think. It was during one of these walks that I stumbled across the suitcase. It was lying in the gutter on Oak Ridge Lane, a quiet street with old, leaning trees that seemed to whisper secrets. The suitcase was old-fashioned, scuffed leather with brass latches, the kind you'd see in a black and white movie. I stopped, my curiosity overriding the logical part of my brain that said, "Leave it alone." For a moment, I stood there, debating. What was it doing here? Who left it? The handle was worn, and the edges were frayed. It looked like it had a story, and I couldn't resist. I glanced around. The street was deserted, the nearest porch light faint and flickering. Nobody would know. I crouched down and hesitated before unlatching it. The suitcase opened with a reluctant creak. Inside were stacks of papers, yellowed, fragile, and filled with handwriting that flowed like a river. No cash, no valuables, just letters. A lifetime of them. I thumbed through a few, and one word kept jumping out at me. Sorry. It was everywhere, scribbled in the margins, underlined in shaky pen strokes. I felt like I'd opened a time capsule of regret. I carried the suitcase home, unable to leave it there in the gutter. Once inside, I spread the letters across my coffee table and started reading. They were all addressed to a single person, Evie. They spanned decades, written in a handwriting that grew shakier with time. Each letter was an apology, a confession of guilt for something the writer never fully explained. "Evie, I'm sorry for that day at the lake. I didn't mean for it to happen. Evie, I see your face every time I close my eyes. Please forgive me. Evie, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." The letters weren't dated, but the tone shifted as they went on. The early ones were pleading, almost desperate. The later ones felt resigned, as if the writer had accepted that forgiveness might never come. By the time I finished reading, the sun was creeping over the horizon. I was hooked. Who was Evie? What had happened at the lake? And why had someone abandoned these letters? I became obsessed. Over the next few days, I started piecing together clues from the letters. There were mentions of a small town, an old boathouse, and a name, Lake Milton. It wasn't far from the city, a 2-hour drive at most. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I needed to go. Like the suitcase had chosen me to uncover its story. When I arrived at Lake Milton, it was eerie how familiar it felt, even though I'd never been there. The boathouse was still standing, its paint peeling, its roof sagging under the weight of years. A woman was standing on the dock, feeding ducks. She looked to be in her 70s, her silver hair tied back in a loose bun. "Excuse me," I said, approaching cautiously. "I'm looking for someone named Evie." Her head snapped around, eyes narrowing. "Who's asking?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I found something. A suitcase. It's full of letters addressed to Evie. I thought, maybe they belong to someone you knew." Her expression shifted, the guarded suspicion softening into something closer to pain. "Where did you find it?" I told her about Oak Ridge Lane. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared out at the water, the ducks forgotten. "I'm Evie," she said finally, her voice barely audible, "and I don't want to read them." I blinked. "You don't?" She shook her head. "Those letters, they're from Martin, my brother. He's been dead for years." I felt the weight of the suitcase grow heavier in my hands. But why did he write them? What happened? She sighed and sat down on the edge of the dock, patting the spot next to her. "Martin and I grew up here. This lake was our world. One summer, when we were teenagers, there was an accident. A boy drowned. He was Martin's best friend." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "They were out on the water, horsing around like boys do. Martin dared him to dive off the old boathouse roof. The boy hit his head on something underwater. He never came back up." I sat in stunned silence, the ripples on the lake mirroring the turmoil inside me. "Martin blamed himself for the rest of his life," Evie continued. "Even after the police ruled it an accident, even after the boy's parents forgave him. But he could never forgive himself. Those letters, they're his guilt, poured out onto paper. But why leave them in a suitcase on some random street?" I asked. She gave a sad smile. "Martin was always dramatic. I think he wanted someone to find them, to know his story, to remember the boy he couldn't save." I didn't know what to say. I'd expected answers, closure. Instead, I felt like I'd walked into the middle of a tragedy that was never mine to solve. Evie stood and brushed off her hands. "You can keep them if you want. Or burn them. Whatever you think is right. I don't need them anymore." As I watched her walk away, I felt a pang of sadness. Martin had spent his life seeking forgiveness, but it seemed he'd never realized the person he needed it from most was himself. Now the suitcase sits in my living room, untouched. I still don't know what to do with it. Was I wrong to get involved? Or did Martin get what he wanted? Someone to carry his story, even if it wasn't Evie. AITA for digging into a past that wasn't mine? In the year 2036, the stars began whispering back, not with the hopeful hum of first contact or the stark warning of a hostile civilization, but with secrets. Human secrets. It started small. A woman in Montreal woke up knowing where her lost cat had been hiding for the past year, even though she'd long given up hope. A fisherman in Iceland stood on the bow of his boat and heard his grandmother's voice, long dead, telling him to check the shoals south of town. He pulled up nets bursting with fish, saving his village from a harsh winter. Then came the bigger things. The impossible revelations. Corrupt politicians exposed in eerily specific detail. Lost children found. Murders solved by people who had no business knowing the details of the crime scenes. By the time the whispers reached me, the world had already begun to unravel. I was sitting on the roof of my apartment complex in Baltimore, staring at the light pollution that drowned out the stars when the voice came. It wasn't outside of me. It was in my chest, rattling in the hollow space where a scream might start. "Jacob White's watch is buried beneath the cypress tree," it said. No preamble. No introduction. Just a fact, delivered with the weight of a confession. Jacob White had been missing for 5 years. A local history teacher vanished after school one day, his car found parked at the edge of a swamp with no sign of struggle. I didn't know him personally, but his face had been plastered on missing person flyers for months after he disappeared. My first instinct was to shake it off. Maybe I'd seen something about him recently and my brain was playing tricks on me. But the voice came again, firmer this time. Beneath the cypress tree. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I was standing in rubber boots at the edge of the swamp, shovel in hand, trying to remember why I'd thought this was a good idea. The cypress trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their roots curling above the water as if they were trying to escape the muck below. I picked one at random and started digging. It didn't take long to hit something solid. A glint of metal. My heart pounded as I reached down, pulling free a mud-encrusted watch. Jacob White's name was engraved on the back. I should have gone to the police. That's what any normal person would have done. But something about the way the watch felt in my hand made me hesitate. It was warm, almost alive, pulsing faintly against my palm like a second heartbeat. And then the voice came again, quieter this time, as if speaking directly into my ear. He's not finished yet. By the end of the week, I wasn't the only one digging things up. The whispers were spreading. People followed them like gospel, uncovering lost treasures, buried bodies, and secrets that should have stayed hidden. It was as if the stars had opened a celestial confessional, but instead of absolution, they offered truth, raw, unfiltered, and utterly inescapable. The world didn't know what to do with itself. Some people praised the whispers, calling them a divine intervention. Others called them a curse, a punishment for humanity's sins. Governments scrambled to control the information, but how do you silence the stars? The whispers found their way into every corner of the globe, speaking in every language, exposing every lie. And then they began asking questions. Why did you lie about the fire? They asked a man in Tokyo, who broke down in tears and confessed to insurance fraud. What happened to the boy on the bridge? They asked a woman in Prague, whose horrified expression said more than words ever could. The whispers weren't just revealing truths anymore. They were digging for them. By the time they asked me their first question, I'd already stopped going to work, stopped answering my phone. The watch sat on my kitchen table, ticking away like a bomb I didn't know how to defuse. Where were you the night of July 14th? The voice asked, cutting through the silence like a knife. I froze. July 14th. My mother's birthday. The night I'd lied and said I couldn't visit her because I was stuck at work, even though I just wanted to sit in my apartment and be alone. She died the next day, a heart attack in her sleep. I never forgave myself. I didn't know. I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't know it would be the last time. The stars didn't answer, but the weight in my chest lifted, just a little, as if they'd taken my guilt and held it up to the light. That's when I realized. The whispers weren't just pulling secrets out of the world. They were trying to fix it, or maybe fix us. But the question was, at what cost? The noise woke me at precisely 3:33 a.m. It was a soft, mechanical hum, the kind of sound a fridge might make if it were alive and dreaming. At first, I thought it was coming from the apartment below, where the neighbor's kid had been known to tinker with drones and other DIY disasters. But when I sat up in bed, rubbing sleep from my eyes, the sound shifted, growing louder, clearer, as if it were migrating directly into my room. I fumbled for the light, but the switch wouldn't respond. Great, I thought, a power outage in the middle of the night. I reached for my phone instead, its weak glow cutting through the dark. That's when I noticed it, the shadow on the wall opposite me. It was large, symmetrical, and entirely unfamiliar. My room didn't have furniture that cast shadows like that. And the source of the shadow, whatever it was moving. Slowly. I should have been terrified. I should have screamed, bolted, done something. Instead, I stared, transfixed, as the shadow grew clearer, sharper, as though it were stepping out of the wall itself. Then it spoke, not in words, but in a vibration I felt in my chest, a low, resonant hum that made my ribcage vibrate like a tuning fork. You've been selected. For what? It didn't say. The shadow began to shift again, condensing, folding inward on itself until it became a perfect black sphere hovering midair. It was small, about the size of a grapefruit, and it pulsed faintly, emitting the same hum that had woken me. Against all better judgment, I reached out to touch it. My fingers grazed its surface, and the world around me collapsed. I fell, not down, but inward, as if space had folded into itself and swallowed me. There was no sense of time during the fall, just a sensation of endless motion. When I finally stopped, I was no longer in my room. I was standing in what could only be described as a void. The ground beneath me was solid, but there was no light source, no walls, no horizon, just endless black. The sphere hovered in front of me, larger now, pulsing like a heartbeat. Do you accept the mission? What mission? My voice sounded small, hollow, swallowed by the void. The sphere didn't respond. Instead, an image materialized in the air beside it. It was a city, not one I recognized, but undeniably Earth-like. Skyscrapers loomed over crowded streets, their windows glowing faintly in the night. But something was wrong. The buildings were cracked, their edges fraying into nothingness, as if reality itself had begun to unravel. "The city is collapsing," I said, the words tumbling out of my mouth unbidden. The sphere pulsed again. "You are the repairman." "I'm not. Wait, what?" I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. "I don't even know what this is. I'm not qualified for." "You have been selected." The hum grew louder, almost deafening now, and the sphere expanded, engulfing me once more. This time, I landed hard. I was on a rooftop, staring out over the same city I'd seen in the image. The air was heavy, buzzing with static electricity. Below, the streets churned with people, but they weren't moving naturally. They twitched, their motions jerky, like marionettes controlled by a drunken puppeteer. Above me, the sky was fragmented, as if someone had taken a hammer to the firmament and left it spiderwebbed with cracks. I turned to find the sphere, but it was gone. Instead, I was holding something, a device, small and sleek, with a single button that glowed faintly. It looked like a remote control, but there was no screen, no markings, nothing to indicate what it did. I pressed the button instinctively, and the world shifted. The rooftop dissolved, and I found myself standing in the middle of the street. The twitching people surrounded me, their faces blank, their eyes empty. They didn't seem to notice me at first, but as I raised the device, one of them turned. Its head swiveled too far, like a doll's head on a loose hinge, and its mouth opened in a soundless scream. The others followed. One by one, they turned to face me, their movements erratic but unified, like a swarm of insects sharing a single mind. My heart pounded as they began to close in. I pressed the button again, and the world fractured. This time, I was underground, a subway station long abandoned, its walls covered in pulsating vines that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with a smell like burnt wires and damp earth. The device in my hand began to vibrate, and a voice, mechanical, cold, spoke from it. "Repair point detected." I turned to see a crack in the air itself, jagged and glowing. It pulsed with the same energy as the sphere, its edges fraying into threads of light. I reached out hesitantly, and as my fingers brushed the crack, the device reacted. A beam of light shot out from it, knitting the edges of the crack together. The hum in the air softened, and the vines on the walls began to retreat. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could fix this. Maybe the sphere had chosen correctly. Then the ground shook. The vines burst back into life, coiling and snapping like angry serpents. The crack I had repaired split open again, wider this time, and through it, I saw something moving, something enormous, its form obscured but unmistakably alive. A single eye, vast and unblinking, stared through the fissure, locking onto me. The device in my hand grew hot, the voice urgent now. "Repair compromised. Engage failsafe." "What failsafe?" I shouted, but the device didn't respond. The eye blinked, and the air around me rippled, distorting like heat waves off asphalt. The vines surged toward me, and I ran. The device clutched tightly in my hand. I don't remember how I escaped. One moment, I was running through the tunnels. The next, I was back in the void. The sphere hovered before me, smaller now, dimmer. Is that it? I asked, my voice trembling. Is it over? The sphere pulsed weakly. The first fracture is sealed. Many remain. I stared at it, exhausted, terrified, but somewhere deep inside, I felt the faintest flicker of resolve. The city was broken. The world was breaking. And for reasons I couldn't begin to understand, I had been chosen to fix it. Okay, I said finally. What's next? The sphere pulsed once more, and the void swallowed me whole. I was halfway through painting a mural in my living room. Bold sweeps of teal and gold. A stormy ocean crashing against a jagged cliff, when my phone started ringing. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but then I caught a glimpse of the name, Dad. Hey, Dad, I answered, balancing the phone against my ear while smudging paint on my jeans. Hey, kiddo, he began, too cheerfully. So listen, your Aunt Linda's car broke down again, and she needs a ride to the family reunion next weekend. I told her you'd be happy to drive her. I froze mid-brushstroke, a wave of annoyance breaking over me. Next weekend? Dad, I've got plans. You're painting your walls, not launching a space shuttle. She really needs you. His tone was light, but carried the weight of expectation. The kind of weight that had always worked on me before. No, I mean I really have plans. A friend's art exhibit, I lied. It wasn't exactly untrue. Amara's show was happening soon, but not next weekend. In reality, I had planned nothing more than staying home, eating takeout, and finishing this mural. There was a pause, then the classic dad sigh. Come on, you know how much this reunion means to her. She doesn't drive, and no one else can do it. She could Uber, I suggested, though we both knew Aunt Linda would never spend a cent she didn't have to. Or maybe someone from her side of the family can pick her up. I already told her you'd do it, Dad said, his voice edged with impatience now. Don't make me look bad. There it was, the thing I hated most, being guilted into saying yes. My stomach churned as I stared at my half-finished mural. It wasn't just the inconvenience of the drive. It was the principle of it, of always being the one to rearrange my life because someone else couldn't manage theirs. 4 years, I'd been the family problem solver. Need a babysitter last minute? Call me. Can't figure out your taxes? I'll handle it. Dog ate something suspicious? I'll Google solutions. I used to wear my reliability like a badge of honor, but lately, it felt more like a straitjacket. Every favor pulled me further away from my own wants, until I couldn't even remember what they were anymore. But this time, I decided I wasn't going to do it. Not for Aunt Linda, not for Dad, not for anyone. I'm sorry, I said, as firmly as I could. I can't. You can't? Or you won't? Dad asked, his voice sharp now. I won't, I corrected, surprised by how steady I sounded. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then he said, Wow, I didn't think you were that kind of person. What kind of person? I asked, heat rising to my face. The kind who doesn't show up for family. He hung up before I could respond. I dropped my paintbrush and sank onto the tarp-covered floor, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. My mind raced with all the ways this would ripple through the family. Dad would tell Aunt Linda, who would tell Uncle Pete, who would tell my cousins. By tomorrow, the family group chat would be a minefield of passive-aggressive comments and emojis. Sure enough, by evening, the fallout began. My sister texted, Dad says you're not helping Aunt Linda. What's going on? Cousin Jake chimed in with, I guess some people think they're too good for family. And then, the piece de resistance. Aunt Linda herself called. I heard you're busy with some art thing, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. That's fine. I'll figure it out. Don't worry about me. I wanted to scream. It's not about art. It's about me being allowed to say no without being crucified. But I just said, I hope you find another ride, and hung up. That night, I lay on my couch, staring up at the swirling teal and gold waves on my wall. For the first time in years, I felt free. The world hadn't ended. The family hadn't disowned me, yet. And while the guilt still gnawed at me, it was quieter than I expected. The days that followed were predictably awkward. Mom sent me a long email about the importance of family. Dad refused to answer my calls. And at one point, Aunt Linda left a voicemail saying, "I hope your art is worth it," which I deleted before it could burrow under my skin. But something strange happened, too. Amid the criticism, a few small, surprising things emerged. My sister sent me a private text. "Honestly, I don't blame you. I've been roped into driving her before. It's awful." A distant cousin I barely knew messaged me, "Good for you. Boundaries are important." Even Amara noticed something was different when I showed up at her art show, glowing from having spent an entire weekend doing nothing but painting and eating Chinese food. "You seem lighter," she said, handing me a glass of champagne. I smiled. I think I finally put myself first for once. Now, as the dust settles, I'm left wondering if I did the right thing. Did I let my family down? Or did I finally start standing up for myself in a way I should have years ago? AITA? I moved into apartment 5B because it had the cheapest rent and a view of the park. What it also had, which no one mentioned, was Irene. Irene lived in 5A, directly across the hall, and from the moment I lugged my first box up the stairs, she was there. She wasn't unfriendly, exactly. She was just present, like the weather. The kind of presence you had to adapt to because it wasn't going anywhere. "Your shoes squeak," she said as I carried a lamp past her open door on my first day. "No, hi. Welcome to the building," or "Need help with that?" Just, "Your shoes squeak." "Sorry about that," I mumbled, suddenly self-conscious of every step. From that moment, Irene made it her mission to oversee my life. The trash cans weren't for furniture boxes, she informed me. The hallway smelled like that weird tea I drank. My key fob clicks too loud when I unlock my door late at night. She wasn't rude, but her comments stuck to me like cobwebs, catching on little insecurities I didn't even know I had. So, when her cat, Mr. Pumpernickel, started scratching my welcome mat, I decided it was time to reclaim some ground. "Hey, Irene," I said one morning, holding up the shredded remains of my once cheerful live, laugh, love mat. "Can you keep Pumpernickel away from this? He's kind of destroying it." She squinted at the mat like it was a personal affront. "He's just playing. You should get one that doesn't attract cats." I laughed. "Yeah, or you could keep your cat inside." Irene's lips pressed into a tight line. She said nothing, but the next day, a note appeared taped to my door. "Welcome mats are communal territory." This was war. I went on Amazon and bought the ugliest, loudest, most obnoxious welcome mat I could find. It was neon green, with a giant cartoon frog on it, and it flashed LED lights when stepped on. I wanted it to mock everything about Irene's neat, beige sensibilities. When it arrived, I placed it outside my door and waited. By nightfall, the mat was gone. At first, I thought it was stolen, but when I peeked across the hall, I saw it, folded neatly and propped against Irene's door. She had replaced it with her own mat, a plain brown rectangle with the word decorum embroidered in cursive. "Really?" I muttered under my breath. The escalation began innocently enough. I started leaving my mat out again. Irene would swap it for hers within hours. I retaliated by moving my mat to her side of the hallway. She responded by pushing it back with the toe of her orthopedic slipper, like it was radioactive waste. Soon, the mats became less of a floor covering and more of a chessboard, each of us moving and countering in increasingly elaborate ways. But Irene's next move came out of left field. One morning, I opened my door to find Mr. Pumpernickel lounging on my mat, wearing a tiny knitted sweater with the words, "Try harder," stitched across the back. I burst out laughing, which might have been the exact wrong response. That night, she left the mat wars behind and upped her game. The battle shifted to sound. It started with Irene's collection of vintage clocks. She had at least a dozen, and every single one ticked loudly. Somehow, the noise found its way through the walls, a constant rhythmic reminder of her presence. I countered by blasting a Spotify playlist titled Cat Music at random intervals during the day, filled with purring and chirping sounds that drove Mr. Pumpernickel into a frenzy. She retaliated by cooking cabbage. Constantly, the smell seeped through the vents, clinging to my clothes and making my apartment feel like an abandoned diner. I fought back by lighting incense, Cinnamon Ginger sensed that she hated, judging by the furious coughing fits I heard through the walls. One day, I came home to find my mail stuffed into my welcome mat slot. Not just mine. All the mail for the building. Irene stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching as I tried to dig it out. Mail's communal territory, she said with a smile. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded coolly. Of course it is, Irene. The next morning, I woke up early and planted a for sale sign in the potted plant by her door. By lunchtime, it was gone, replaced by a note, not funny. By now, our feud had gone beyond words. We communicated entirely through objects and gestures, passive-aggressive rearrangements, mysterious reappearances, and the occasional untraceable prank. She once replaced all the light bulbs in the hallway with dim, greenish ones that made the place look like a fish tank. In response, I installed a fake security camera outside my door, pointed directly at hers. The tipping point came one morning when I opened my door and found a trail of sunflower seeds leading from my mat to hers. It was subtle, but I understood the implication. I was the squirrel in her kingdom. That evening, I bought a giant bag of birdseed and dumped it in the shared alley behind our building. By dawn, the place was swarming with pigeons. She called an exterminator. The exterminator called the landlord. The landlord called us. We sat in his office, two grown adults glaring at each other like rival gang leaders at a peace negotiation. I don't care who started it, the landlord said, rubbing his temples. I care that we have pigeons, cabbage smells, and neighbors threatening to install electric fences over welcome mats. Figure it out, or you're both evicted. We left in silence, trudging back to our apartments. For the first time, Irene didn't have a quip or a comment waiting. We stood in the hallway, staring at our respective doors. Finally, she sighed. You know, she said, Mr. Pumpernickel only scratched your mat because he liked it. I blinked. You're saying this started because your cat has bad taste? She cracked the smallest smile. I guess you could say that. We didn't call a truce, exactly, but things changed after that. The mat stayed in place. The clocks ticked, but less often. I still lit incense, but only the mild ones. Irene even gave me the try harder sweater. Mr. Pumpernickel doesn't wear it anymore, but sometimes I do. It's weirdly cozy. AITA? That's what we called it anyway. A plain cardboard box that appeared on the communal desk in the center of the office one Friday morning. No label, no sender, no context. Just sitting there like a quiet dare. Naturally, we did what any group of bored office workers would do. We circled it like suspicious meerkats. Who ordered something? Asked Marie, the unofficial den mother of our team. It's not mine. Everyone shook their heads. The box sat there, daring us to open it. I bet it's one of those subscription snack things, muttered Adam, our resident conspiracy theorist. Or maybe a prank. You know, like glitter bombs? That's when I got the idea. Not a full-fledged, let's ruin someone's day prank. More like a gentle tug on the thread of curiosity that would send someone into a spiral of overthinking. I leaned forward, nudged the box with my pen, and declared, let's leave it. Marie frowned. Leave it? Yeah. Don't open it. See what happens. At first, everyone laughed. Then Adam nodded slowly, the way he always did when a new experiment was underway. The box stayed put. By the end of the day, it was still unopened, and the air in the office had shifted into something charged, like static before a storm. By Monday morning, the box had acquired an aura of menace. People walked by it hesitantly, sneaking glances like it might suddenly sprout legs and attack. Adam started taking notes, actual notes, on who approached it and how long they lingered. Marie taped a sign to it that read "Do not open" in bold, red letters, which only made it worse. It was around midweek that I decided to escalate things. I typed up an anonymous note on one of those ransom note generator sites, the ones with cut-out magazine letters. It read, "Whoever opens the box will suffer." Then, when no one was looking, I slipped it under the lid. By the time lunch rolled around, the note had been discovered, and the office had devolved into chaos. What kind of psychopath writes this? Asked Jenna, who sat near the box and now refused to make eye contact with it. Adam immediately declared the box cursed, complete with a detailed theory about ancient relics and vengeful spirits. I could barely keep a straight face. That's when Dave got involved. Dave was the manager. The sort of guy who owned 3 different Bluetooth headsets and took power walking seriously. "All right," he said, hands on hips. "This has gone on long enough. Someone needs to open the box." "No one's touching it," Adam declared. "It's a trap?" "A trap?" Dave asked, incredulous. "A psychological one, maybe," I added, feigning innocence. "What if it's like a social experiment?" Dave sighed, probably wondering why he'd taken this job. "Fine, I'll do it myself." The room collectively held its breath as Dave reached for the box. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the lid. And then, nothing. The box was empty. There was a long, awkward silence before Dave muttered something about wasting company time and stormed off. I felt a pang of disappointment. I'd expected more. A scream, a gasp, maybe some applause for orchestrating this tiny drama. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, the box was back. Same spot, same size. This time, it wasn't empty. Inside was a single, shiny red apple, perfectly polished, like something out of a fairy tale. No note, no explanation. I stared at it, heart thudding. I hadn't done this. I swear I hadn't. Marie gasped when she saw it. "It's a warning," she whispered dramatically, "like Snow White." "That's ridiculous," I said, but even I felt a little uneasy. Adam, of course, had a theory. Someone's messing with us. It's psychological warfare. They're escalating. "Who's they?" Jenna asked. Adam didn't answer. Things spiraled quickly after that. By Thursday, the apple had disappeared, and in its place was a mirror. Just a plain hand mirror, positioned so that when you approached the box, your own reflection stared back at you. Marie refused to go near it. Adam started cataloging the events on a spreadsheet, complete with timestamps and photos. "This is your fault," Jenna hissed at me during a coffee break. "You started this with your stupid let's leave it idea." I denied it, of course. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about who had picked up the thread I'd left dangling. Someone else was playing now, and I had no idea what their next move would be. By Friday, the office was on edge. The box was empty again, but no one trusted it. People avoided the desk entirely, taking the long way around just to avoid looking at it. Dave, exasperated, declared it a fire hazard and threatened to throw it away, but Adam protested. "You can't disrupt the energy," he said cryptically. It wasn't until late afternoon that things came to a head. Marie screamed. We all ran to her desk, and there it was, the box, now on her desk instead of the communal one. Inside was her stapler, surrounded by dozens of tiny plastic spiders. Marie hated spiders. "That's it," she yelled, storming over to Adam. "This was you, wasn't it?" Adam denied everything, but his grin gave him away. "Hey, it's just a joke," he said. "No harm, no foul." Marie wasn't having it. She grabbed the box and threw it at him. Adam ducked, but the lid popped off, and the stapler clattered to the floor. The tension in the room shattered like glass. But here's the thing. I didn't put the stapler in the box. And judging by Adam's expression, neither did he. The box stayed in the office that night, abandoned on the floor where it landed. When we came back Monday, it was gone. No one admitted to taking it. No one wanted to. But every so often, when I'm alone in the office, I think I hear a faint rustling sound, like cardboard being dragged across tile. AITA? I'll never forget the day my brother and I nearly set our lives on fire, metaphorically, but almost literally too, over a first edition book. Not just any book, mind you. This was his copy of the Scarlet Chronicles, a rare fantasy novel from the 80s that had been out of print for decades. It wasn't just a book to him. It was his holy grail, his Excalibur. I, however, thought of it as a dust collector with a cracked spine. To be clear, the book didn't always feel like a big deal. Jared bought it for $10 at a flea market when we were kids. He only found out what it was worth after obsessively Googling it in college and discovering people paid thousands for pristine copies. His wasn't pristine. It was battered from years of love, but it was signed by the author, so it held this aura of mythical importance for him. It lived on a shelf in our parents' house, encased in one of those weird plastic covers like a museum artifact. I moved back home after a breakup, drowning in heartbreak and the general awfulness of feeling stuck in my childhood bedroom at 30. Jared, who had moved out years ago, still treated the house like his personal storage unit. His shelves of old trophies, Magic, the Gathering cards, and books sat untouched, gathering dust while he gallivanted off to his high-paying tech job across the country. One rainy Saturday, I decided to reorganize the bookshelves in the living room. Call it boredom, call it a quest for control, but I started sorting the chaos into piles. That's when I spotted the Scarlet Chronicles. It wasn't just sitting there. It was tucked behind a row of paperbacks like it was hiding. Seeing it brought a spark of nostalgia, the memory of us trading turns reading it aloud as kids, creating elaborate games based on its characters. I figured Jared wouldn't care if I borrowed it. It wasn't like he'd miss it. He hadn't touched the thing in years. So I pulled it out, plopped down on the couch, and started rereading. And wow, this book still slapped. The plot was intense, the characters flawed and vivid. It was like stepping into our childhood again, minus the part where Jared insisted he always got to be the hero when we played. Then disaster struck. I had a cup of coffee balanced on the armrest, and in my excitement at a plot twist, I reached too quickly for it. The cup wobbled, time slowed, and before I could grab it, the coffee spilled all over the book. For a moment, I stared at the ruined pages in stunned silence. The coffee had soaked through a chunk of the middle, bleeding into the signature. I frantically dabbed at it with a towel, but it only made things worse. Panic set in. I couldn't just leave it like this. Jared would murder me. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying every hack I could find online. Blotting with paper towels, blow-drying the pages, even sticking the book in the freezer. Some YouTube videos swore it would help. By the end, the book was warped, wrinkled, and smelled faintly of French roast. It looked like something a squirrel had chewed on. When Jared came home a week later for a surprise visit, I panicked again. I'd stashed the book back on the shelf, hoping he wouldn't notice. But Jared being Jared, he immediately walked into the living room, sniffed the air, and said, "Why does it smell like coffee in here?" I tried to deflect. Reorganized the shelves. Doesn't it look nice? He squinted at me, then at the books. Wait, where's my Scarlet Chronicles? It's right there, I said too quickly. He pulled it out, and his face fell. What the hell happened to this? I tried to laugh it off. Oh, that? A little accident. It's still readable. Adds character, right? His jaw tightened. Character? Character? This isn't some beach read, Leah. This is a first edition. A signed first edition. Do you have any idea what you've done? I bristled. Okay, calm down, it's just a book. It's not just a book, he shouted, his voice cracking in a way that made me flinch. You're so careless. Do you ever think about anyone but yourself? Are you serious right now? I shot back, anger rising in my chest. You haven't even looked at this thing in years. You didn't even know where it was until I touched it. That doesn't mean it's not important, he snapped. It's mine, Leah. You don't get to decide what's valuable to me. Well, maybe you should have taken it with you instead of hoarding your junk here like this house is a time capsule. I yelled. Why do I have to tiptoe around your crap when you don't even live here? He stared at me, his expression a mix of rage and disbelief. You've always been like this, he said coldly, taking what isn't yours, acting like the world revolves around you. That's rich, I said. You're the one treating everyone like side characters in the Jared show. It devolved from there. He blamed me for being irresponsible. I blamed him for being possessive. Words flew that we couldn't take back. The argument ended when he grabbed the ruined book, stuffed it in his bag, and stormed out. Mom tried to play peacekeeper later, saying, "It's just a misunderstanding. You two will patch things up." But weeks passed with no word from Jared. My texts went unanswered. I started wondering if this fight had been about more than the book. If it was about years of resentment and unspoken grievances finally boiling over. I still don't know if I'm the villain in this story. It was just a book to me, but it wasn't to him. And maybe I should have respected that. Or maybe he should have let it go, because nothing stays perfect forever. AITA? I called it Project Solstice. It wasn't a party. It wasn't an event. It was an experiment, equal parts art installation, time capsule, and social dare. The idea came to me late one night while scrolling through photos of old New Year's Eve parties, all those glittering faces frozen in time, and I wondered, what if you could bottle a single moment forever? I spent months planning it. The rules were simple: 12 people, 12 hours, and absolutely no leaving. Once the sun set, the doors would lock. Phones were banned. There would be no music, no lights other than the massive ring of candles I'd built into the floor. Food would be minimal, just enough to keep people tethered to reality. And the big twist? A mirror room at the center, where each guest had to spend 1 full hour alone at some point during the night. I wanted them to feel time the way it really passes. Slow, heavy, and undeniable. I handpicked the guest list like I was assembling the cast of a play. Each person had a specific role in my mind, a spark to ignite a certain type of energy. There was Elise, the philosopher who could turn any conversation into a spiral of existential dread. Martin, the actor with a booming laugh that always bordered on unsettling. Amanda, the skeptic who loved to poke holes in things. And of course, my wild card, Gwen. Gwen was magnetic in a way that didn't seem entirely human. She was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't that. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only thing in the universe when she looked at you. People fell in love with her by accident. Then there was my brother, Derek. Derek and I had a complicated history. He wasn't a bad person, exactly, but he was the type who could hijack anything. Turn a conversation, a moment, even a relationship into something that revolved entirely around him. Growing up, I'd learned that his gravity was strong enough to bend everyone else's orbit. And for Project Solstice, I couldn't risk that. The dynamic had to stay delicate, balanced. Derek would tip the scale, and the experiment would crumble into chaos. So, for the first time in my life, I didn't invite him. I told myself he'd never even know. Derek wasn't part of my usual social circle, and I'd been careful about who I invited. I figured he'd spend the weekend doing whatever Derek does, completely oblivious to the fact that I was hosting something extraordinary without him. The night of Project Solstice arrived, and my 12 guests gathered at the old warehouse I'd rented for the occasion. Everyone gasped at the ring of candles, the eerie silence, the way the air seemed to hum with anticipation. I gave a short introduction, nothing too heavy, just a few words about being present, embracing discomfort, and seeing what the night would reveal. Then the doors locked, and the experiment began. For the first few hours, the energy was perfect. Conversations ebbed and flowed. Strangers became friends, and the flickering candlelight gave everything a dreamlike quality. People took turns in the mirror room, emerging pale and quiet, as if they'd glimpsed something profound. At one point, Gwen made eye contact with me across the room, and for a moment, I felt like I was the subject of my own experiment. But around midnight, there was a knock at the door. It was subtle at first, a quiet tapping that blended with the sounds of people shifting and whispering. But then it grew louder, more insistent. Someone joked that it was the ghost of the warehouse, and we all laughed nervously. But then Elise frowned and said, "I think someone's really out there." I tried to brush it off. "It's probably just some drunk kid who stumbled by." "Maybe," she said, still frowning. "But what if it's not?" The group grew restless. The knock turned into a pounding. Amanda got up and walked to the door. "Hello," she called. "Open the door," came a muffled shout. "I know you're in there." My stomach sank. It was Derek. I felt the blood drain from my face as the pounding continued. "Seriously?" he yelled. "You're throwing a party, and you didn't invite me?" The guests stared at me, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. "Who is that?" Martin asked. "My brother," I muttered, heat rising to my cheeks. "He's not supposed to be here." Gwen raised an eyebrow. "You didn't invite your brother to this?" Ouch. I ignored her and walked to the door, my heart hammering. "Derek," I hissed through the crack, "go home?" "No," he said, his voice sharp with betrayal. "I'm not going anywhere." "What the hell is this? Some kind of cult ritual?" "It's not a party," I snapped. "It's an experiment. You wouldn't get it." "Oh, I wouldn't get it?" he shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Try me." I opened the door just enough to see his face, flushed and furious. "This isn't about you," I said. "For once in my life, I wanted to create something that wasn't about you." The words hit him like a slap. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might actually leave. But then he pushed past me into the room, his eyes scanning the candles, the guests, the mirror room at the center. "Wow," he said, his voice thick with disdain. "This is intense." The group fell silent, watching him like he was an uninvited storm cloud. Derek met their stares with a smirk that was equal parts charm and defiance. He turned to me. "So, what happens now? Do I ruin your precious vibe, or do you finally admit you're just like me, desperate for attention?" I wanted to scream, but instead, I forced a tight smile. "Fine," I said. "Stay. But you're not part of the experiment." "Sure," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Whatever you say, Dr. Frankenstein." The rest of the night was a blur. Derek didn't ruin everything, but his presence was like a pebble in a shoe, small, but impossible to ignore. The balance was off. The experiment faltered. In the end, I couldn't tell if Project Solstice was a success or a failure. But Derek's words stuck with me. "Do you finally admit you're just like me, Ida?"